I'm Phong Palafox, and I'm from Bilinguistics, and today we are going to be talking about serving clients from diverse backgrounds. So let's start off with some disclosures. I fully disclose that I'm employed by Bilinguistics, and we receive payment for presentations and royalties from book purchases. I do receive a salary from them, which then funds my children and feeds my breakfast taco habit. And I will mention that Asha has kindly provided me with an honorarium for being with you guys today. I have no non-financial disclosures or relationships to say, except for the fact that I've had a very passionate relationship with our field for about a decade and a half. So here's what's going on right now. 1 in 5 children in our country speak another language. So we all know that the most common language after English is Spanish for a majority of our country. There's about 7 states who speak German and French. But now let's really talk about after Spanish and after English, how our country looks right now. So if you look at this slide provided by Slate, you can see that there are a myriad of other languages that we have to think about. In my home state of Texas, it's Vietnamese. We have to think about Hmong, Tagalog, French, German, Navajo. So really, this is who we're serving right now. And this is not the first language of English, not Spanish, and this is only the first 3 languages. So there's some work that we need to do in order to serve our diverse populations. So you guys have asked loudly for help, and we've listened. So in the next 30 minutes, you are going to learn a framework to know if what you see as a speech or language difference, which are natural processes for English language learners, or what you see is actually a speech or a language disorder. And through use of a case study, you're going to see examples of how this framework is going to apply for speech and language concerns. So I will be the first to say that this struggle is real. So I am a bilingual speech-language pathologist, and you're going to say to me, but you're bilingual. But to be honest, outside of English and outside of Vietnamese, I'm a monolingual SLP. I've been pulled in to do assessments for Mandarin, I don't speak it, for French, I do not speak French, for Korean. So I've used interpreters for these assessments, but I still needed to know what I needed to do as a speech-language pathologist. So let's take a look at this slide. How qualified do you feel about serving diverse learners? So if you take a look at this right here, for the past 8 years, Asha has documented how you feel about serving diverse backgrounds. And if you look at the middle, about 50% of you feel neutral. You're not quite sure of how you feel about serving our English language learners. About 30% of you feel somewhat qualified to very qualified to serve our populations. And then 30% of you don't feel qualified to do this job. I know this doesn't feel good, and I'm confident that after today, after the 30 minutes, you're going to walk away with the skills necessary to feel better about what you have to do as a professional. So, as with all speech-language pathologists, I know you guys like tests, so we are going to listen to 3 audio clips of 3 speakers saying 1 sentence. And I want you to determine where you think this speaker is from natively. What is their native language?
A quick brown fox jumped over a lazy dog.
All right, after listening to that first audio clip, I would say that most speech-language pathologists are going to determine that that individual is from somewhere in Europe, and you are absolutely correct. That is a Russian speaker. Let's listen to the second clip.
The big brown fox jumped over the lazy dog.
The big brown fox jumped over the lazy dog.
All right, now most people, from my experience, say that these speakers are from Asia, and you are correct there. They speak Vietnamese. They're my aunt and my uncle. All right, let's listen to the third clip.
The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog.
All right, fantastic. This third speaker, her native language is Spanish. Here's what I want you to walk away with right now. Most speech-language pathologists are fairly accurate in at least determining the location of where these speakers are from. So I want you to know that you know more than you think. You went to school, or you are going to school to be a speech-language pathologist, and you have this skill set. Empower yourself with that. You are much farther along than you think, and you can provide the information to provide accurate assessments and therapy for English language learners. So what's the game plan for today? We've established that you know a lot about this information already. We're going to give you a framework and give you some tools. Why are we going to give you a framework? So that you can take these ideas and you can apply it to any two languages that you need to. And then we're going to give you some tools so that when you walk away, you're going to know whether errors are due to a second language influence or which ones are due to a speech impairment. You will feel confident in working with a multicultural population, and we will change the look of the Asher School survey graph by 2018. I'm confident of that. So I would like to introduce to you Jesse. He is a 10-year-old fifth grader. He loves to draw, he loves playing practical jokes, and he loves trains. Now Jesse at home has parents and a Banoy and Ông Noi, grandparents who speak Vietnamese. I will say that Jesse predominantly speaks English 95% of the time, but I also want you to think about something. Because of his native language influences, we need to consider Vietnamese even though he speaks English a majority of the time. Here's the other cool part. Jesse attends one of the few dual language schools in the nation. So he receives his instruction in both English and in Vietnamese. And through his story and his experiences, we are going to navigate this framework today. So here we go. So when we're determining difference versus disorder in bilingual children, it's important to consider the effect that specific features of their second language may have on their speech patterns. And errors can be categorized in 3 different ways. The first type of error are developmental errors. So for example, if you have a 2-year-old who cannot make an or R sound, that's okay. Developmentally, 2-year-olds may not yet have that sound. The second group of errors are due to second language influences. This is considered a difference. So Jesse possibly may not be able to make a specific sound because his native language is Vietnamese and he's learning how to speak English, and those type of errors are okay. The third type of errors are atypical. Atypical errors that happen in their native language and also in their second language, which in this case is English, is considered a disorder. So this is a way for you to look at it. Developmental errors, okay, that's a difference. Native language errors, that's also a difference. We are going to be concerned when there are atypical errors in their native language and also in their second language of English. So we're going to talk about the language interaction framework, and that shows us how 2 or more languages may interact within the same human being. So let's talk about positive transfer. Positive transfer is when there are the same aspects of the first language. We're going to call that L1, language 1. And those aspects are very similar to the second language, which for us is English here in the United States. We're going to call that L2. And positive transfer happens when those 2 languages are very similar. So for example, the D sound, the D sound, exists in English and in Vietnamese. T exists in final word position in English and in Vietnamese. So for example, if you were to say the word dot as a Vietnamese speaker, you're going to say it as dot in English because of a positive transfer between Vietnamese and English because it's the same. On the other hand, we're going to have negative transfer. So when aspects of L1 are different than L2, negative transfer results. So let's take a case where we have a sound that exists in English but not in Vietnamese, the voiceless TH sound. So when a native speaker of Vietnamese encounters that sound, what he's going to do is say, that sound doesn't exist in my repertoire because I'm a native Vietnamese speaker, so I'm going to try to find the sound that's closest to it that I know of in my native language. In this case, it's going to be the T sound, the T sound. So negative transfer takes place. And know that negative transfer is expected because of the differences in language. So in this example, for the word think, I think I'm an awesome SLP. And if you are a native Vietnamese speaker, what you're going to do is go, doesn't exist in my speech sound repertoire, so I'm going to go T instead. And then consonant clusters do not exist in Vietnamese either, so ink isn't going to be there, so I might just go K. So instead of saying think, I'll say tink. So let's take a look here at this visual representation. This is an awesome Venn diagram, and what you're going to see is that on the left side are all sounds that are unique to L1. On the right-hand side are all sounds that are unique to the individual's L2, their second language, which again is English in our case. But what we're going to look at is the common ground in the middle. These are the sounds that both languages share, and this is really important because when errors take place in this middle section, this is when we know that it's going to be a speech sound disorder. Here's an example for Vietnamese. This is interesting to me. So on the left-hand side are sounds that just exist in Vietnamese. One example that I always think about is the number 9, kin. And I'm married to someone who is not a native Vietnamese speaker. And, you know, people are always like, teach me something in Vietnamese. So counting is something that you know, we do quickly. So I'm like, all right, let's count to 10. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So for kin, that sound does not exist at all in English. And so typically what I hear are native English speakers say jin. So they use a j sound because that's the closest thing to kin. So on the right-hand side, you see sounds that are very specific to English that do not exist in Vietnamese. Those sounds in the middle, though, that's what we are going to concentrate on if individuals make errors in those middle sounds, because even as a native Vietnamese speaker, you should be able to do those sounds. I'm going to take a quick moment right here to talk about how we also have to consider developmental norms that we talked about earlier. And I will say that in many languages, we do not have developmental norms. And speech language pathologists always say to me, well, I mean, but what if in Vietnamese you get the R sound much earlier? And I'm going to say that's where we're going to use our professional judgment to think about those developmental norms. So now I'm going to show you some phonotactics of Vietnamese so that you can use this as an example. So the first part of Vietnamese phonotactics is that tones are phonemic. What does that mean? It means that if your tone goes up or down or stays neutral, there's going to be a different meaning for that. So for example, on this slide, what you're going to see is my aunt on the left side, the number 3 in the middle, and my dad on the right side. So we're going to do it together. So we're going to say the number 3 in Vietnamese, and it's ba. So again, the number 3 in Vietnamese is ba. On the left-hand side is my aunt, and I call her ba. See, the tone went down. So instead of ba, it's ba, and that's my aunt. On the right-hand side is my dad, and I call him ba, so the tone goes up. So you have ba, ba, ba. So those 3 different tones definitely show 3 different meanings. Something else is that in Vietnamese, our words are monosyllabic, unless they are borrowed from other countries. So for Vietnamese speakers learning English, words with lots of different syllables is challenging. So sometimes you might decrease the number of syllables in that word. My favorite example is my husband. His name is Jeremy. And my father, who has known him for many years, to this day still call him Jimmy. Another example of phonotactics in Vietnamese is that our final consonants, and typically our words don't even have a final consonant, but when they do, the consonants are either nasals or voiceless stops. And then the last one is that we do not have consonant clusters. So in English, we have blends, clusters all over. In Vietnamese, we don't have this. So these are the Vietnamese phonotactics that we think about for this particular language. All right, let's do an example. So for the word bath, you now know that voiceless TH does not exist in Vietnamese, so the closest approximation of that word for a native Vietnamese speaker is the word bat. They replaced the T for the TH. All right, now let's go back to Jessie. So I'm giving Jessie a Goldman-Fristow because there are no standardized assessments for Vietnamese speakers raised here in the United States. And he made errors on 4 sounds. Now I'm going to tell you right now that because the Goldman-Fristow is not normed on native Vietnamese speakers in the United States, I will not report those scores because they are not an accurate representation of those norms. So let's take a look here at the 4 sound errors that he made. And I want you to think about, is this error due to his native language of Vietnamese, or is it a true disorder because it's a sound that came from that middle red portion that we talked about earlier. So, as you can see, the R sound is the one sound that exists in both Vietnamese and in English. So that sound would be a sound that we would target, and it represents a speech sound disorder. So I would write this goal for Jesse. He's going to produce the prevocalic R at the sentence level in 7 out of 10 opportunities without a model across 3 consecutive sessions. And for me, as a speech-language pathologist, I know that people have the most outcome whenever we drill. So when he comes to see me for 30 minutes or 45 minutes during our sessions, he's going to leave with about 200 to 300 repetitions of that prevocalic initial R sound. So now let's talk about language. All right, we know that the syntax in Vietnamese is different than the syntax in English. So for example, adjective noun order is different in Vietnamese. Use of copula is also very different. In English, we use it with nouns and with adjectives. In Vietnamese, it is only used with nouns. Plurality is also marked differently. In English, we mark it with a S. I have 3 cats. In Vietnamese, we do not add an S to show plurality, so that's a difference there syntactically as well. And the last one, this is my favorite difference, is that in Vietnamese, we do not conjugate verbs. Isn't that great? You just say the verb, and then the word that you use before or after it will tell you when that action took place. So, taking a look at this example, here's Ruby. Ruby wears a blue dress. In Vietnamese, I'm going to say Ruby bận áo đầm màu xanh. So for a native Vietnamese speaker, they may say Ruby wear, because verbs don't conjugate either, Ruby wear dress color blue. And those errors are okay. Here's another one. The boy ran. Now we know that he ran previously to this moment because ran is a past tense word. In Vietnamese, what we're going to say is Con trai chạy ngày hôm qua. The boy run, and then we're going to say the word yesterday, ngày hôm qua, to show you that it's something that happened previously. Here's something else that's also really important. Now we know that using literacy-based interventions and drawing in story retell and story grammar is something that's really meaningful in our profession because it pulls in so many different areas in terms of semantics and syntax. Now here are the story elements that are common to most cultures. We have the initiating event, the attempt, the consequence, the resolution, the setting. By knowing this, you're going to know that when a child or an adult tells a story, we're going to include these story elements. So based on this, I assessed Jesse. Now, here's an excerpt of his story retell that he did with me in English. The boy and the dog and the frog, and then they go to sleep. So he proceeds to tell this story, but knowing what he should have in his story based on being a native Vietnamese speaker, I can see that he's missing some of those important story grammar components. And I also sat down to chit-chat with Jesse conversationally. And I will say that in most cases, you will ask him a question, and then he will respond, and then that will be it. He will not elaborate on his response, and rarely does he ever ask me, he calls me Cô Phương, Miss Phong, a question. So based on this assessment, and also thinking about his native language of Vietnamese, here are the 2 goals that I'm going to write for him. The first one is that he's going to include 4 out of 5 major story grammar components when retelling an age-appropriate story using transitional words, because he's not right now, across 3 tracking data sessions without the support of visuals. And then conversationally, I want him to be able to have a conversation. Back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. So we've talked about the considerations for assessing speech sounds and also assessing language and considering the client or student's native language. In the next couple of minutes, I want to give you some strategies that are easy to use and effective. And this is effective for all clients and all students, I feel, but specifically for our diverse caseload because it's going to maximize your time and it's going to have maximum output in terms of what your client and students are able to do. So we're going to talk about brain-based strategies. We're going to talk about engaging the brain when you are teaching and doing your speech-language therapy. So what is that, Brainbase? It means you're going to utilize natural brain processes that will help maximize your effort. Did you hear that? Maximizing your effort. What that means is that this will save you time, and it's going to make the biggest input, especially for those who speak another language, and you're going to rely on other means outside of those language parameters to make the impact that you need to make on their speech sounds and on their language output. So what the brain loves is engagement. You want to engage all learners. That means using music. It means getting up and moving around. It also means using gestures. And gestures does not require any type of oral output from your mouth. It's using your hands. So if you use gestures with English language learners, and with all learners really, you're going to get 3 times better retention after 3 weeks than if you did not use gestures. Here's something else about the brain. The brain has 3 purposes. The first one is survival. Thank goodness for that. The second one is your emotional needs. And then the third one is cognitive learning. So here's the thing, friends. If our clients and our students do not feel emotionally safe, we are not able to do the job that we are expected to do as speech language pathologists. And feeling safe emotionally means rapport. Then it means gaining trust, because you can't gain trust without building that rapport, which then eventually leads you to working on your speech sounds and working on your language outcomes. You know, this makes me think, for me, this topic is so personal because I'm an English language learner. I grew up as the oldest child out of 3 siblings, and I was the first person to go to school. And I remembered in kindergarten, there were 60 students. It was a very large kindergarten class there at Hartman Elementary School. And I felt like I didn't belong. I did not know the language. I didn't know what was going on. And my parents were doing the best that they could. And I remembered it was February. And they sent home a note that said, everyone needs to bring a Valentine's for your classmates. Now, we had no idea what Valentine's Day was. My father had no idea, but I brought home that note, you know, little Fong did, and my dad said, okay, and I knew it had to do with hearts because there were hearts everywhere. So that night, we went to Eckerd's, a local store, and I bought construction paper. And so we came home, and I knew I needed to make hearts. So I sat there on the floor with my father for hours making these hearts and gluing them. It was beautiful. It was like hearts that were attached. And at the end of the evening, I made 4 of these beautiful pieces of art. So the next day when I went to school, we got into school, and down the hallway were 60 white bags with everyone's name on it. Now here's the thing. I will say that for me, I knew that I didn't have enough. But the hardest part was looking at my father's face, because he knew in some capacity that he failed his daughter because we didn't understand what Valentine's Day was. And you know what? Miss Minahan came, and she got down to my level, and she looked at me and she said, Fong, these are the most beautiful Valentines I've ever seen. Which of your 4 special friends will get to have this? And I just got up and I went and I put it in the bags that I knew. And I want to tell you this story because she made me feel emotionally safe. And that was so important. And I promise you, at the end of the day, who was the teacher that taught me the most? It was her. So think about that. Now, something else too, in terms of incorporating brain-based strategies, is students need to know why they are existing in front of your face and within the parameters of your speech and language room. And that means that all students, including our English language learners, need to know their goals. So here's how I do it. I go, I work on my, whatever it is, storytelling, B sound. I've had clients as young as 1 year old know, I'll say, I work on my, and they'll say, bah. And I'm like, yeah, you work on your bah sound. So make sure they know exactly why they are there. You cannot make progress when you do not know what you're working on. Here's a video of Jesse telling you guys, he can do it so much better than I can, on what he's working on.
Okay, Jesse, what are you working on today?
I work on conversation.
Yeah.
I work on telling a story.
You work on conversation and telling a story. Are you ready?
Yes.
What's going
Now, earlier today, I talked about using story grammar, and I'm a huge fan of that. Now, in 2005, I met a student, and she worked on retelling a story. Now, I worked for months on getting her to know the parts of the story. I pulled information from the classroom. I worked on worksheets. I did everything, and I would be like, "What are we working on?" And she would say, "Soccer." We never talked about soccer in my speech and language room. But this student always walked around, and she was always moving and dropping beats. And I was like, all right, get up, let's drop some beats. And with my skill set, I got up and I did some hip hop and some rapping. And you know what? It stuck with her. So we did characters. What are they? They're the people in a story. What's a setting? It's the when and it's the where. What's a problem? Hey, what's wrong? What's a solution? Hey, let's solve it. So we put in some beats, we moved around, and guess what? The very next week, I would say, "Hey, what are we working on?" And she would still look at me. Did she get it? No, because it's been a week. But what she did do is she would get up and she did the same exact beats that I did the week before. The next week when she came back, she knew what each of those components were, and we moved forward. Now, knowing what I know, what we did is that we employed brain-based strategies so that she could maximize the efforts going on in her brain, and it really stuck with her. Here's the most beautiful example of Jessie doing the story grammar rap for you all. Nice job, Jessie.
Characters are the people in a story. In a story, setting is when it will. Setting is when it will. Problem, it was wrong. Oh, problem, it was wrong. Oh, solution, let's solve it. Solution, let's solve it.
Give your brain a kiss. Nice job. All right, so today we talked about this framework that is going to help you differentiate between a speech sound disorder and a language disorder. I know I just talked about Vietnamese, but you can apply these rules to any language out there. The first thing we do in our office whenever somebody calls and says, "Hey, we need a speech language pathologist to come out to do an Urdu evaluation," we don't have an Urdu speaking speech language pathologist, but we're going to go online and we're going to type in difference between Urdu and English language, and information will pop up. And I know that it's an open source, but it's a start. And as speech language pathologists, we have the capability to think about those vens and to say, oh, well, these are sounds that just exist in Urdu. These are sounds that exist in English, and I'm going to concentrate on that middle portion. I want to share with you guys 3 of our favorite resources. The first one is a book called Difference or Disorder, and it picks out the most common 12 languages, and it's an easy-to-use guide where you pick it up. The vens are already there for you. The list of language differences is already there for you. And my favorite part of this book is that each chapter has a personal account of native speakers, because we need to think about people's stories as well. The middle book is written by over 70 recognized authors, and it talks about different types of English dialects and also addresses 20 different languages. And the very last book is a comprehensive guide that talks about not only assessment, but it also talks about treatment. So this presentation today addresses facets of one of ASHA's 8 strategic objectives. You can learn more about this objective and the other 7 strategic objectives by going to the webpage noted at the bottom of the slide. So I want to leave all of you today, friends, with one simple thought. I know that there are many languages out there that we can't even count, and I know that you want to do well as a speech language pathologist to serve all of our students and all of our clients. But here's the one thing. The one language that we all possess is the language of kindness, and that speaks volumes. And I know that you know how to speak that language because you got into this profession in the first place. Thank you so much for joining me today.